Okay, we'll get started. And as people join us, we will kind of fill them in. So thank you for joining us today on the NEWaukee Cloud Cafe. This is our cafe conversation program we do generally around Tuesday at noon with different people from around the area, around the country. My name is Jeremy again, and this program is one of many programs. So we do around 5 to 10 programs a week, all different varieties for you to find your people, passion, purpose, and learn about place. These programs are sponsored by Shorewest and Ginger Lazovik, so appreciate her support, and North Shore Bank. And big shout out to them for really stepping up and fostering these online discussions in a time when we need connection. So I'm really extremely excited about our guest today, Carrie Melissa Jones. She's the founder of Gathering Community Consulting, and she has a new book that I haven't received yet in the mail, but she will be sending that to me hopefully, right, Carrie?
It's in them tonight.
It's Building Brand
Printing labels.
Tonight, awesome. Building brand communities
yes.
and how organizations succeed by creating belonging. And really a lot of the book, I imagine, goes into building online communities. So welcome to the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm really excited.
So before we dive into anything in the book, why don't you tell us about your background so people can kind of get if they didn't read the bio that we had on the website, you can give them a little bit of information.
Yeah, so I've been building online communities for about 15 years now. It started as a hobby, and I didn't realize that it was a job that I could do, in the late 90s, early 2000s. And then, went to school for English and communication, and realized as the internet was growing that this really was a career path that one could do. So I started practicing building online communities in the San Francisco Bay Area in around 2012 or so. And then I have been doing it ever since. I co-founded a company called CMX, and we help provide training for community managers about 4 years. And now I'm a consultant, and I help people build online communities if they've never done it before, or if they have one already and they just don't know why it's not working the way that they want it to. So that's what I do now.
So we have a bunch of people that are from around the state, but we do have a bunch of people from outside the state as well. We do have some people here from Milwaukee, and you found Milwaukee, or Milwaukee found you. Which one is it? And now that you're living here?
Yes, I love that. So I was living in Seattle prior to moving here in, about a year ago now. And I just knew I really wanted to go back to school. So I go to the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee, go Panthers. And I realized, working in my career, that I really just wanted to step back and do some research, and also look at what research was already being done on online community buildings, community building. I have not had enough coffee this morning. To figure out how it's impacting our well-being. And so I started looking at programs. Where can I study this? Where are people concerned with these ideas? And actually, there's some incredible researchers at the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee who specifically focus on communication technology and how it impacts all of us all around the globe. So I came and visited. And just immediately when I got here, I didn't know what to expect. I didn't have any expectations necessarily. But as soon as I got here, people were so warm and welcoming. I went and got Ian's Pizza almost immediately, and just really enjoyed that, and really felt at home immediately. So I wasn't totally sure that I was going to stay here. I just decided, I'll give it a shot, go visit. And then I remember calling my partner the second day I was here, and I just said, so are you okay if we move to Milwaukee? And he said, are you serious? Like he thought I was joking. And I was like, yes, I'm completely serious. I feel like I don't want to leave right now. So after many weeks of going back and forth, we found how to do it possibly. And I've been here now since August and been going to school, and yeah, I really love it here. It felt like home right away. Just think Milwaukee's the best.
Well, I am a little biased, but I agree. So talk to us about the book. Talk to us about building brand communities and how organizations succeed by creating a belonging. Like, what does that mean for someone that maybe isn't familiar with that term?
So yeah, because the word brand can mean a lot of things and the word community can mean a lot of things. The first thing that me and my co-author Charles Vogel do in the book is define what brand community means. So it's basically any group of people who's brought together over a shared purpose, and that those people are brought together by a brand. So that's just any identifiable organization. It could be a nonprofit, could be a for-profit, a political campaign, a movement, or a social justice organization. So just any group of people brought together in that way. And so the book is really about, all the things I've seen people doing wrong over the last 15 years and how we can do it better. And, there are a lot of people that have been doing this work for a very long time. We interview over 20 of them in the book and share their insights. And there's no reason why we should be recreating the wheel. Right now, people have been building online communities since the invention of the internet. So let's take what they have learned and what we've tried and practiced before and build something even better in the future. And I think that's really, really important right now, especially when many people who otherwise would love to be gathering offline, their only option is to gather online and to forge those relationships. So the other thing that it's about is how not to extract value from, let's say you're a for-profit organization and you want to build community. I hear a lot of for-profit organizations say that, but when it really comes down to it, what they want is to extract information and time, commitment from people. And so the book is about how do you do that in a way that is not hurtful, harmful, destructive to the people that you're gathering, and how do you do it in a way that's mutually beneficial. So obviously there's ways to build community and there are ways to build community that are about building these really deep, rich relationships. And that's what the book is really teaching.
Well, let's talk about destruction and what people do bad.
Yeah.
Tell us some of the things you've seen that people get wrong and people do that they should be kind of checking themselves and saying, this isn't maybe the right way to build community.
Well, I think one of the first things I would say is that people, like I was saying, like people use the word community and they mean a million things when they say that word. And that word has this unipositive, warm feeling of like community, we're all together, we belong. And people will say that word and think that by saying it, it will magically come to be. But that's not how it works. And we need to really focus on listening and on maintaining humility and really not so much on the just saying the word and hoping serendipity will come to pass, because it just doesn't work that way.
What about belonging? I think, I've read some studies that when people join companies, they kind of know that they want to leave within the first 45 days of being employed there because maybe they don't feel like they fit in. What's your advice, or why do you think companies are so bad at making feel like they belong there?
Oh, that's an interesting stat and a huge problem. Yeah, especially, if we look at the research over the last year or two showing that work-life imbalance is one of the largest contributing factors to loneliness and depression among workers today. I think really what it comes down to is that so many organizations are so focused on what do I get out of this? What is the ROI? What is the return on investment of what I'm doing? That they can't get out of their own heads and think about what is the much bigger picture here. Like, yes, like there might not be a 6-month return on building belonging. It takes a lot longer than that. It takes, make a best friend in 6 months. That takes years of work. So how do we get out of that immediate need to show like quarterly returns, half yearly returns, annual returns on this, so that we can really focus on building deep, meaningful relationships that then the ROI is almost immeasurable, actually is immeasurable oftentimes, but is so much larger than something that you could show, we increased retention by 5% this quarter of our employee base. So it's really about stepping back and seeing the big picture of the value that can come out of this, and not just focusing on these short-term returns.
And to kind of ping pong here for people, I mean, we're kind of forced to build online community right now, which is interesting. So a lot of people are doing it. Where should someone start when they want to start building these communities or these programs and these things that they're creating? Where are like maybe 2 or 3 points that we should start in that?
So the first thing I'll say is that there's a difference between you being completely building from scratch and you already having relationships that you can start to coalesce into a community. So those are 2 different starting points. One is you actually have a head start if you've already been building relationships but haven't them together yet. And the other one is, say you're new to an industry or new to a city, you have to find who are those people I need to be building relationships with. So really this person over here who needs to build those relationships needs to focus there first. So focus on listening, focus on getting to know people, what their deeper needs are, and not only how you can meet them, but how the community and all the resources of the community at large, say in Milwaukee, might be able to serve them and might be able to come together. So the first step, if you don't yet have those relationships, that has to be built. Otherwise, what ends up happening is you build something where you come in and act like the creative savior and you say, oh, okay, I'm an outsider. I think how to fix this problem for everyone, and you start to create something that's not informed by any real needs. It's your projection of what you think people need. So that would be the first thing. Start with relationships. Now, if you already have those relationships, it's just about bringing them together into a shared space. That'll be the first thing to do. So right now, digitally, that's going to mean getting on a Zoom call or even gathering in, let's say, like whichever platform you might be using, Slack or Discord, and starting the conversation of what is it that we all really need right now? What is it that we can do together? What gifts do we bring? What needs do we have that we can each meet? And then start to actually architect something from there, as opposed to picking a platform and picking technology and then just rushing to build something on it. So right. It really is always about relationships first and investing there first.
What does online provide that offline doesn't, and then vice versa?
What does online provide that offline doesn't? So a lot. So I think there's actually unexplored, but major benefits to online community building. The first is that it removes many of the issues of bias that otherwise might be immediate in face-to-face communication. So let's say, for instance, I'm actually doing some research on this right now. We weren't on a Zoom call. We were in an online forum where I couldn't see your face. You had an avatar. Where I didn't know anything about your background. So all of that stuff that human beings, just as human beings naturally they have biases around, all that goes away so that you can actually start to have a conversation that's more about the individual or more about the group, as opposed to assuming things about them. So I think that's one of the big advantages that it gives. The other thing is accessibility. So people who could not make it in-person meetups, who were afraid to go to your in-person events because they didn't know if they could get their wheelchair in and out of the facility. Things like that just become non-start issues in online communities, because as long as you have internet, and this country has a huge digital divide that must be resolved, but as long as you have internet and some device to access it on, you have the ability to show up and be there. And I think especially with asynchronous communities, you don't even have to necessarily be there at a certain time. So that means that you can communicate with people in Australia who are asleep right now. And you couldn't even do that in the past. And all these conversations can be ongoing and don't have to be this like sense of urgency and like you're missing out, FOMO, essentially.
Yeah, totally.
So that can go away.
And if anybody has questions for Carrie, there is a Q&A session. And if you're on Facebook Live, post your question and our administrator, Rita, will send those to me and I'll read them at the end. I kind of want to, I went through your blog and some of your blog posts on your personal website. So I just wanted to pull and extract some of the more interesting things that I found in some of your articles. But I'm going to dive into some of your past, and I hope that's okay. Well, it is a public, so it must be okay,
yeah,
right?
Let's not go too deep.
You said, you kind of mentioned you were a lonely, depressed, awkward teen, and you discovered online communities as only places you could be seen, appreciated, cared for by total strangers who then became friends. Can you elaborate more on this experience? And I think, a lot of people maybe don't feel like they belong, and they kind of find these different communities online that they might not find their communities in their communities they live in person. Can you elaborate on that?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, I think most people in their teenage years, if not all people in their teenage years, feel some sense of not knowing who they are and not knowing where they belong. I think that's just natural. For me, I was painfully shy to the point where I could not speak up in class. I would shake if someone called on me and I, didn't have an answer prepared already. I would just start shaking violently. And yet I didn't have anyone to talk to about that. And I thought that everyone experienced that, but well, I went back and forth. Either everyone was experiencing that with me or I was the only one. And I was the odd one out. So yeah, building in-person relationships, I did have them, but they just didn't go as deep. And so I was struggling with many, many things, my family and my own personal issues when I was, in high school, and I didn't have anyone to talk to about any of that. It just all just kept pushing it down and down and down. And then I discovered online music forums, and that was the first time where I realized like all of these teenagers, it was a really teen heavy community, are discussing like their crushes and, like they're questioning their sexuality and who they are, and they're, finding new music and sharing it, and creating this community all their own where they're being completely honest and unfiltered about who they are. And so when I found that, I was able to finally just like share honestly what was going on in my family and in my own personal life. And people stood up, and not stood up, I mean, maybe at their computers at home, but they raised their hand and said, me too. You're not alone. You're preaching to the choir here. That was a big like +1, in forum speak, lots of +1s. And I realized at that point I wasn't alone. And so those people, like, we would call each other. I had friends in New Orleans and the Philippines. Like, we would create pen pal situations and mail their care packages. And so I kind of had this like whole secret life, because I didn't tell my friends about this. It was sort of like embarrassing. Like, you didn't tell people that you had all these forum friends. But I realized I didn't have to contain who I was to the online world. And so for me, that was really, it was a bridge for me to go from experimenting with who I was, figuring out like what I believe in, what I value, and finding people who agreed with me or who could challenge me. And then I could bring that to my offline life. And so it actually strengthened my relationship with my friends, because I realized I didn't have to only share with my internet friends. And I really credit that for why I have so many long-term friends now, even from high school, middle school, elementary school, my life.
I have a question from Facebook Live that I'll jump in.
Mhm.
It's actually a couple questions, well, 3 questions and a question, but let's see if we can go through this. What type of jobs are in there in your field? What type of orgs might this effort need locally? And
Mhm.
has COVID changed your job in any way, or has it been a benefit, I guess, and new opportunities?
Mm. Yeah,
There's a
those are
lot
all
of them
great
there. We can
questions.
tackle one at a
Yeah.
time.
Yeah, I can see them, so at least I can,
Yeah.
follow
Okay.
them and I won't forget. Yeah. So what types of jobs are there in this field? So there are jobs in every industry in online community building for online community builders. I will say that some of the fastest growth ones, especially right now amidst the pandemic, are tech companies as well as medical communities. So there's a lot of health forms and health communities that desperately need to build communities right now. And so in terms of who's hiring in this particular field right now, it tends to be, yes, like medical, so healthcare, tech companies, what else have I, some education. Education is huge right now because teachers do not know how to teach online for the most part. This is a brand new thing. And so building belonging in an online classroom is just almost, we're at the very edge of what that might look like. So that's where this is really, really needed. And I think if we're talking about locally, who might be where these opportunities might crop up, same here. Like we have hospitals here, we have universities and schools that will all, we don't know actually what they're going to be doing in the fall. UWM right now is talking about doing a hybrid model. So we desperately need people to try to create some sort of sense of belonging and culture online, where right now there's just a lot of confusion and uncertainty. So yeah, I think this is one of the areas that's really growing right now.
And then how has COVID changed kind of your day-to-day or allowed for new opportunities?
Yeah, so I mean, it certainly has impacted me in the immediate aftermath. I was actually traveling around doing a bunch of workshops. And I just gotten back from Vancouver, BC, when the pandemic was announced, and it had already reached there. So I'm surprised I was even allowed to travel there now looking back on it. So I can't do my in-person workshops, which for me are really important because face-to-face, there is a different dynamic. It's not better or worse, it's just different. And so that's what I was attuned to doing, was teaching teams in person how to build online communities. So I've had to really shift my business and change what I offer and change how I do my work on a regular basis. But I'm very grateful, very privileged that I have internet access at my home and that I can do this right now. So yeah, I'm just trying to do everything I can to teach the skills that I've learned to everyone I can right now, so that more people can pick up the torch and do this work.
I think when people think of online communities, they generally go to the platforms like, we build an online community on Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, all the usual suspects here, Meetup.
Mm-hmm.
And most of those platforms are kind of really around like, here's my opinion. If you disagree, let the battle begin type of stuff, with
Mm-hmm.
my point of view. Do you think that, obviously I'm going to ask about tools later, but do you think that actually kind of builds community because it divides people into camps, or is that the opposite of what you're, most of how you build a community? And kind of the
Sorry.
question I'm going, I think, because when people say, well, this is your point of view, it kind of, I've noticed sometimes if I have a point of view and other people have the same point of view, it almost builds a community with those other people, but it divides us, in a bigger context. I just kind of is interested in your thoughts on that.
Yeah. So there's a major difference between having boundaries in a community and having a fear-based community. So what you're describing is one in which, and that's not my terminology, that's a writer and the founder of the Tamarack Institute in Toronto, I believe, or Ontario, Canada. And he explains that these fear-based communities are about bonding over the things that you mutually dislike, or the things that you mutually just do not want to create in the world. And so there are certainly many communities that get created in fear, and that is just true and is. The problem is that when we continue to build fear-based communities, especially in a world that's increasingly globalized, that's not sustainable, and in fact is very, very harmful and destructive. And it is human nature to gather with people who look, sound, act like us. Like all of the research points to that. And so for me, when I'm thinking about leading communities, it's so important to guide people away from those behaviors. And right now the technology is not built around that. It's actually built around the opposite. The technology, especially if you're talking about Facebook groups, I'm talking right at Facebook right now, they are like algorithmically engineered to create more and more controversy, because the more eyeballs they can get inside those Facebook groups, the more money they're going to make from the ads there. And so the business model is at odds with what's actually good for humanity. And the thing is that that's not going to change until the entire business model changes. So yeah, our technology is actually battling against what would be better for us as human beings. And a part of that is in the way that even the way the platform is constructed. It's constantly pulling you into something else. You can never really be in deep community when you're in a Facebook group, because you're getting all these notifications of other groups that you're supposed to be interacting with. And, you know, your great aunt Mildred is like asking you a question, and you're pulled out of it all the time. And I think it creates this sort of frantic energy. And so I actually, like, I only have Facebook because my classmates are on it these days, and I do not build any communities on Facebook groups for any of my clients because of that. And the technology is doing its part to pull us apart right now, and it needs to change.
What tools do you recommend for people that are, you know, obviously the reason people probably jump to Facebook and LinkedIn, and because they have large audience of people that might be interested in the content of your community. So what other platforms or tools should people use if they're trying to start their own community?
So there are over 60 community platforms on the market.
Go through
today.
all of them.
I have a spreadsheet.
Yeah.
So starting with platforms and starting with technology, I really caution against that. The time to ask about which technology to use is once you know your purpose and what people are going to be doing together in that space. So, I mean, frankly, like, there are times where Facebook groups are going to be the best choice for you, just because people are there. You might not need the deep engagement that otherwise you might need in a community, and so starting with the platform will actually really be distracting. So I almost don't even want to open this Pandora's box of like what all these 60 platforms are. I will share that there's 3 categories of them. There's the open source ones. So Discourse is an example of one of these. So if you have any kind of coding knowledge or are willing to put down the money to hire developers, you can custom build pretty much any feature you want in your community. And it's all yours, and you can even self-host it. You don't have to host it on Discourse's servers. Then there are those that are built for enterprise level organizations. So your Sephoras, your Dells, these brands will invest in multiple hundreds of thousands of dollars per year licenses. And then you've got your more DIY sort of no code platforms. That's the third group. It includes things like Mighty Networks, Facebook groups, Discord. Yeah. So those are more plug and play. So if you don't have the money, the developer skills that you need to customize the platform, you can start there.
Excellent. And what about, you kind of talk, you know, I think people their goal sometimes is to build these huge networks of community, and they think growth is maybe the model of a community. And sometimes, I've even been looking at the way engagement is on online communities that we've been doing in the Cloud Cafe, and looking at completely different than we look at like how we would measure maybe an in-person event. Like obviously you want more people to support your mission, you want more people there. But then sometimes, you have an event with 15 to 10 people in it, and it's way better and it has a bigger impact. So I guess the question around that when it comes to building your online community, does size matter in these communities, or is that just an old way of measuring things and how you build belonging?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, the simple answer is that size does not matter.
Yeah.
It absolutely does not. It's about purpose. And if your purpose is to grow a global movement, size might for you. But if your purpose is to forge meaningful relationships, then size won't matter as much as depth of relationship and people's actually bonding and knitting together in that community. So, but the issue is that most of the ways that the platforms allow us to measure our success in community building is through growth. So again, technology is fighting against what might be better for us and better for our well-being at this point. But yeah, I know size does not matter as long as you know what your purpose is and that you're able to show that the purpose is growing. Yeah. The impact that you're having is growing. That's where growth matters, not the number of people.
Yeah, and I think you've been kind of reiterating purpose in communities. And I think I'm interested in another purposeful community that people try to build all the time around nonprofits. It seems like nonprofits, they have usually strong missions, visions, they have purpose, but a lot of times when you talk to them, they lack engagement and they lack maybe that community building aspect to get people involved in the nonprofit. Why do you think there's a disconnect there? Where do you think nonprofits miss the boat on building that belonging to the mission?
So I've been on a nonprofit board before, where the mission and vision are articulated and written into the documents and are on the letterhead and things like that. But the meetings I would think would be just going through an agenda, like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, we're done. Everyone go. Mm-hmm. And so that starts from like even how do you interact with your board as an executive director of a nonprofit? What is that relationship like? And then it's also about as a nonprofit, are you just, again, going back to what I mentioned earlier about, are you acting like a creative savior of people? Or are you a nonprofit that's building with those that you serve? And so I think a lot of nonprofits that I see doing good work, but not the most powerful work they could be doing with the most impact, tend to think that they can provide the solution and that, that they will just get it out. And their main job is just to get their solution out into the world. Whereas if you bring in your who is ultimately going to be impacted by that solution, bring those people into conversation, bring in the funders and have conversations with them about what they'd like to see with your board. Nonprofits are complicated because there are so many stakeholders involved, but building with each and every type of them is really important and something that I see very, very rarely and done well.
Mm-hmm. What some questions from the audience here that I'll get to before I get to the rest of mine. What is your personal definition of humility?
Ooh, that's a good one.
That's from Facebook. Yeah.
So,
and let me just say that's from who was it from? Lillian.
Awesome. Well, that's a fantastic question, Lillian. So I don't want to, I'm not going to quote this word for word because I don't know it word for word and I don't want to butcher it. But Maya Angelou said something to the effect of, I trust someone with humility. I don't trust someone who is modest. And so there's a difference between modesty and humility. And that's sort of how, when I'm thinking about like humble myself and the people that I work with, it's not the same thing as modesty. Like you should see that you have power, not only over yourself and how you react to yourself and your emotions in the world, but also you have power over those, and with those, I should not say over, power with those you interact with every single day. And you have the power to change your individual relationships. And so humility is about acknowledging what power you do have and putting it to work, not about trying to downplay the power that you have and shirk away from it. It's about engaging your strengths and doing good with them.
Question here from Steve. What is one of your favorite examples of a successful online community, and what about it do you find worthy of emulation?
Oh, so many. There's so many. I'll share.
Besides NEWaukee.
Yeah. So this is number one. So number two is, there's many kinds of communities. I'll share one of my favorite for-profit brand communities is actually the Sephora Beauty Talk, or they've changed their name, the Sephora forums. And they're actually completely integrated with their app. So if you like shopping for makeup or beauty products or skincare, whatever it might be, they have answers to any tiny niche question you would ever have about those products. And their community is extremely passionate about answering any remaining questions and helping people. And they're just so, I've had questions in there, people have like cheer you on, and they're very positive. And, leadership has done a really good job of keeping that community just very purpose-driven and positive. So I would say that's a good example of a for-profit organization. There's so many. The one I always go to, and this is, I'm not just saying this because it's in Milwaukee, is the Harley Owners Group. And so when you get the book, Jeremy, you'll see Harley is all over this book because, my father is a Harley owner and has been for a time and is part of the Harley Owners Group. And what they have managed to do with their communities of riders is just, there's nothing else like it. There's nothing else like it in the world. And it goes back to the Harley story and Harley history and how, Harley's had all these ups and downs and has weathered them. And I just find that so inspiring. I could go on and on and on about it. But they're not an online community. I will say that there's many Harley forums, but Harley does not sponsor them or they don't build forums themselves.
Right. A question here from Bobby. He's wants to know a little bit about Slack. And personally, I've been on Slack. I use it. It's one of those things where I feel like someone with massive ADHD like myself, it's always hard for me to catch up on stuff that's been posted and I just ignore it then. Mm-hmm. And I always find it not the best for community building, but it is a good source for information, but others maybe would be able to use it. But Bobby asks, they've tried a little bit with success to have an ongoing organized chat on a platform. And he's wondering if he should invest more time in it or explore other options.
So Slack is obviously made for work. That's their number one use case and what they will always ultimately build for. I shouldn't say always, you never know. But so it's made for people who are, engaged every single day doing the work that they do for pay generally. So Slack is built for synchronous communication. And so what that means is just it's made for like real-time back and forth chat. And so like you were saying, if you step out of Slack for a few hours or God forbid like a few weeks and you come back and it's like 50 plus messages waiting for you, that feels really, really overwhelming. And that's because the platform is made for synchronous communication. So if your community is not in there every single day, like working actively on projects together, I think it's often not the right platform, because you want something that's going to be more searchable. It's searchable, but it's not, if you compare it to how other community platforms enable their search functionality, it's pales in comparison. And it can feel really overwhelming, and it's hard to get to know people over Slack because you have so little context in their profiles. Obviously, you can customize it, do all kinds of things with it. It's generally not right for audiences that are, especially like those who are older. It's too overwhelming for most people. So I would
Thanks
just
for calling
be.
me old. I appreciate it.
It's too overwhelming for me. I don't use it. I mean by that, not so much like, yeah, what I mean by that is more, it's a new technology that is not like a lot of other things prior to it. So it's like it's built off of IRC. And so if you are just coming to the internet and you are 70 years old, it can feel really, really overwhelming. And so I'm talking here about like elderly populations and how you are not you are not in that group.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Another question here from let's see, did I miss this one? No, from Hannah. Do you have any examples of good nonprofit online communities?
I'm sure that I do. Just have to think about it for a moment. Come back to me on that.
Okay.
I know that I do. Yeah.
Okay, think about that one. Let's get into going back to your blog again, because like you have many different posts on there. I think you recently went on a 21-day creative sabbatical. Can you tell us about that, what you did, and should other people do it, or what are some of the do's and don'ts of a creative sabbatical?
Yeah, so I went on that sabbatical in 2017, right after I left.
2017, okay.
Yeah, CMX. So I'd been building that company with my business partner, really just day in and day out, to the point where I got myself quite sick, actually. And I really, really, really needed a break. So I had planned to take off 21 days, and it being more like 2 months, because when you take a break, it often takes you time to ramp back up into your work again, which I had not accounted for at the time.
Always
So
take
more
that
like
extra day after a vacation for
yes,
another vacation.
Yes. That's a pro tip. Yeah, so I mean, I did it because I was burned out. And so what I needed to do in the first 2 to 3 weeks was actually just get my body back to a place where I was breathing normally, where my I wasn't being woken up at 4 o'clock in the morning in a cold sweat, where I could feel healthy again. Obviously, like having elevated cortisol levels when you're stressed all the time is very, very bad for your physical health. So that was a reset for about the first 3 weeks. And then after that was when I started to actually have some realizations. And that space is what led me to apply to grad school, and what led me here to Milwaukee. So when I got very, very quiet and wasn't always taking in all these different voices during that time, both on the internet as well as in person, I was able to hear that from myself in the most hippy-dippy way possible, that I needed to go to grad school and I really needed to do research. And so that's what I learned from all that.
Awesome. I'll go to one more question, and we'll get back to the nonprofit question and a few others here. In one of your blog posts, you talked about, obviously when people are creating communities, there's competition. There's people in competition in business and a lot of other things. One of the things I always look at is, like, I never really look at competition. I kind of just, I always feel like focusing all on your I mean, obviously you have to look at it, but kind of every day looking at competition makes you less imaginative, makes you less able to reinvent yourself, because you're always looking at it. But you kind of talked about what happens when you focus on too much on your competition. Can you talk about that blog post a little bit and explain it to people?
Yeah, so I had written that blog post, gosh, I don't know how many years ago.
I'm just going
now.
down the list here.
But actually it woke this like kind of PTSD that I had from this job that I had many years ago.
I did my research, obviously.
Yeah, clearly. Appreciate it. Yeah, I had worked at this organization where they had, again, like a written mission and vision statement and all these like really lofty values. And really when it came down to day in and day out, is all they really cared about was crushing their competition. And so their competition had a name that had something to do with fish. And so like, just don't ask. So everything was like anti like seafood related. So like our internal culture was like built around like it was so weird. And I just noticed how toxic that became, because when your boss is always just looking for, you know, how are we one-upping this other organization, you completely lose sight of why you're doing the work that you're doing, completely. So I was only at that organization for 6 months, and promptly realized that it was not the right for me. But I think a lot of organizations work that way, and they're just keeping such a close eye on the competition, and you kind of get this like sick feeling when that's all you ever do. There's so much more opportunity though if you look at what's not being done than what is. So I'm always, you know, especially for community building too, you might look at, you know, say you're building a community of runners, like what are the other running communities do? And if you only focus on that, then you might miss that like your particular running group has all this opportunity to, you know, maybe like organize different kinds of runs at different times of day than your competitor does, and with a different kind of tone and different rituals. And you'll lose all sight of that if all you do is look at.
That's great advice. Great advice.
Doing.
A question here from Lillianne. Do you have any knowledge or experience with online communities for human services professionals, caregivers, or other stakeholders?
Do I have any experience directly with that?
Or any knowledge of that? Like, I guess I'm guessing the question really revolves more again, or which ones are out there that they might be able to connect into?
Yeah, so I mean, there's a lot of, was that asking more about like HR or more about like health?
I'm not sure. It's just human service professionals, caregivers. I guess just a generalization. Are there communities out there that maybe people want to connect to? Do you have any knowledge of them?
Nothing's coming to mind immediately. I know that exists, that there's no way that does not exist. There's the phrase caring for caregivers is coming into my brain. And so I think that might be a thing. And there's a lot of communities around like social and emotional support for those who care for like aging parents or you know, aging partners or unhealthy partners. And so yeah, there's definitely things out there. Google it and see what comes up and see what resonates with you.
Another audience question here. And what is, in your opinion, the way education will look like after COVID-19? How do you see online communities intertwined with schools and universities in the near future?
I wish I knew. I really do.
Well, I think what interests me of just exploring a lot of this lately is the notion, and I think I've said this on another show, is that Harvard could have 1 million students if they wanted to. And, you know, what does that do to, I was just talking about competition. What does that do to other people's competition? And I can't remember where I heard that, but I found that really interesting and it stuck with me, that you could have one mega university and maybe not any of these community colleges, you know, that go away, especially with, as we talked about before the show, even enrollment being down and, you know, people maybe taking more gap years to find out what they want to do.
Yeah. Wow. I mean, I never even thought about that far down.
Yeah. Yeah. Down a rabbit hole on some website.
That's fascinating though. That would create a completely different society, frankly. And maybe it would open up access to education for all finally. And I think if we could open up access to education for all, we would open up untold possibilities in this world. So yeah, I would love for that to be the case. Not necessarily having Harvard be the only university. I think that would actually be bad.
Yeah. I mean, just an example. Yeah.
But certainly this idea of like education is actually like scalable. We can actually, like Lara being a great example of like massive online courses that anyone can take. Many of them being free or super affordable. Obviously online education as it stands today is not for everyone, but I think that it certainly will change. So in the immediate term, I know educators are, like, bless them, they're working so hard right now to figure out how to create belonging in digital classrooms and to help learners who do not learn well from just watching videos or reading a PDF, or especially kids. Like, how do you get that kinesthetic like touch learning right now? So I think we will see a lot more online a lot more technology around helping people who learn differently than just the visual aspect of learning crop up. And so I think we will over the next 10 years, like the ability to actually retain and practice what we learn on the internet will skyrocket. And I think that's really exciting because that does bring about this ability of education for all.
Mm-hmm. And then kind of diving a little bit into that a little bit more. We keep asking these questions around, are there great nonprofit communities? Are there great school communities? Anything?
Questions.
Yeah. I guess people, what it tells me is that people are really looking for community. And
Mm-hmm.
I think you said, I can't remember what you said to me one time around belonging, the difference between belonging and fitting in or something like that. You had some kind of line. Could you repeat that? I don't remember what it was, but it was something about what belonging actually is. It means.
Yeah. So belonging is about, it's about feeling like you have something to give to a group and that group wants what you have to give. Ultimately, that's what it all comes down to. And it's not the same as fitting in. And that idea is from Brene Brown, actually, that fitting in is the opposite of belonging. And if you have to change yourself in any way or make yourself smaller in any way to belong, that's not belonging. Immediately, you're creating something else. And so something more like a cult, maybe. So yeah, I think that that's what it comes down to is feeling valuable and valued.
A question I ask a lot of people that I think I'm really interested on your opinion of it is, do you think social media has a net positive or has been a net positive or a net negative in society?
That's a great question. Well, things are not black and white, is what I will say. And there's always gray areas. So I will take first like the research stance. So what the research shows in communication and psychology is that social media does not cause loneliness. What happens is that people who feel lonely tend to spend more time online and have more problematic internet usage behaviors. So that exacerbates people's loneliness if they already feel that way. At the same time, and this is my personal experience, those who feel lonely and find community online, their entire lives can turn around. And so when I see people finding the right groups, and I think it's great, so many people are asking questions like what communities exist for this particular thing. When people find the right
that should be your future blog post.
What?
That should be a future blog post about all the different communities out there.
Oh gosh. Yeah, there's millions of them, millions, maybe even in the billions at this point. So yeah, I like everything can change for the positive. So I think there are ways that social media is negative, like algorithmic oppression, which is a very real thing that is happening in our world. And I'm not going to go into that now. Read the book Algorithms of Oppression by Sophia Noble if you want to learn more about that. But at the same time, we have the opportunity, and this is a human problem to fix, not just a social media problem to fix, to create spaces in which we do feel belonging, where we are not getting people to fit in and ostracizing people and creating these fear-based communities, but actually creating communities of purpose and deep meaning for our members. And that's, again, like that's a leadership, that's not a technology issue.
Mm-hmm. And we did talk a little bit about college here for those who are online right now. Tomorrow at noon, we actually are talking to someone from Concordia University around the future of college, and they got some interesting perspectives. So if you want to go back to the Cloud Cafe, our NEWaukie's website, and register for that, you can. It should be a pretty interesting presentation and conversation. Okay, I think that's our final question I believe we have in the audience here. That's kind of the end of the program. And I'd like to thank you for joining us today, Carrie. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you. This was really fun. And I did think of, by the way, of a nonprofit.
Okay. Oh yeah.
Uh, there's a community for the Best Friends Animal Society, and they are an Austin-based nonprofit for animals, like animal, obviously humane society, so adoption and things like that. And they are a fantastic community, and they've been building it for many years. So check that out.
Excellent. Well, thank you. And your book comes out again on what date? On
June
Amazon?
9th.
June 9th.
Yeah.
You can get it on Amazon. So
Yep.
thank you everyone for joining us, and we will see you at a future NEWaukee show.
Bye, everyone.